At this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Art Lerman to the stage. Dr. Art Lerman is a professor emeritus of political science, history, and conflict management at Mercy College. Dr. Lerman.
So we're facing many conflicts, and I'm here to introduce the keynote speaker. And the keynote speaker has been dealing and studying these conflicts, especially the ethno-religious conflicts and how to deal with them. I don't know about your whole life, but I'm introducing Dr. Brian Grimm, president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation from Annapolis, Maryland. And I did look at some of the work about the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, and the foundation studies freedom of religion or belief and its impact on society, business, and the economy. And not pessimistically, it has found that freedom of religion and belief can have a very major impact, not just on freedom of religion, but on the whole society. So, Dr. Grimm.
Well, good morning. Yes, good morning, Your Excellencies and colleagues. It's good to be with you this morning. And I'll just share three things at the start. The simple story that I'm going to tell is that when people respect each other and governments protect each person's right to have a belief, change their belief, or not even have a religious belief, that those things promote a society where everyone can work together better, and that means that's good for peace and prosperity. So that's not a hard argument to make. When people hate each other, don't respect each other, then you have conflict. And conflict is a kind of economy where bullets and bombs are the currency rather than dollars and cents, both meanings of the word cents. So that's the nutshell of what I'm going to share. I'm also going to talk about the flip side of something that you might only look at one side of, and that's business. So often in human rights, in human rights area, so in the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, they have an annual meeting on human rights in business. And the focus of that is to hold business accountable and keep it from doing bad things like polluting the environment, abusing its workers, things like that. Well, that's one side of the coin. Flip it on the other side, and without business, we wouldn't have podiums, we wouldn't have microphones, we wouldn't have clothes, and we wouldn't have, we all came here somehow by trains, planes, automobiles, boats. We wouldn't have any of that. And so business provides so much that we all need. And when business is done well, it's quite good and has a lot of positive effect. So that's not normally what we talk about when we're looking at human rights issues, but I'm going to flip the coin around, recognizing that business can create tremendous problems, but the other side, it creates tremendous good. So I'm going to look at that. And the last thing you mentioned, you didn't know about my family. So I have 4 grown kids. I have 10 grandchildren. My children were born in China. I worked in China in the 1980s, 1990s. I was in the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union was actually dissolved in my office building in 1991. The leaders of the Soviet republics came, and so my kids grew up in these environments. We lived in China, in northwest China, Xinjiang, which has been in the news quite a bit lately with the Uyghurs and the Chinese internment camps, which they call vocational training, and others call concentration camps. So two of my kids were born there in that province of China. And then we worked in the Middle East as well. So that's just a little personal background. Well, I'm going to, this will probably be the most data-oriented presentation, so I'll try to make it not too painful for you since I'll have some pictures to go with the data. So first, we live in a world that is very religious. 84% of the world's people today are religiously affiliated, but the projections that I did when I was at the Pew Research Center, we find that there's going to be a 2.3 billion increase in the number of people who are religiously affiliated by 2050, but only a 0.1 billion increase in the number of people who are not religiously affiliated, largely because women who don't have a religion also don't tend to have as many kids. So on average, worldwide, they have only one child. Religious women have 2 or 3 kids. So the religious population in the world is going to outgrow the religiously unaffiliated population in the world by a factor of 23. So we're going to be living in a very religious world in the future, even though in countries like the United States and Western Europe, it feels like religion may be on the decline. Worldwide, that's just not the case, and as many of you may know from your own countries. Now, the world is also going to be different than it is today in terms of majorities. We're going to see a change in our economic structure along religious grounds. Today, 3 of the top 10 economies have majority Christian populations, but by 2050, only 1 will, the United States, and then we'll have a Hindu majority country, India, a Muslim majority country, joining the ranks of countries with the largest economies. So the world economy will have a different flavor, and we've already seen that with the rise of China as well, and some of the conflicts going on there with trade. So one of the studies that I have done for many years is measuring the level of restrictions on religion coming from governments as well as groups in society. And in 2007, when we started this study at the Pew Research Center, 4.5 billion people lived in countries with high or very high restrictions on their practice of religion, coming either from governments or through hostile acts, so ethno-religious violence. However, over the past decade, we've seen that increase to 6.5 billion people living in countries where there are significant problems in either religious violence being present in the country. And recently at the United Nations, there was a meeting on religious freedom, and President Trump spoke at that, and he mentioned recent acts of violence beginning in Pittsburgh with the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue last year. We just had the 1-year anniversary. So he even began with mentioning a country where there's high ethno-religious tension, according to these measures, the United States. And then the massacre in the mosque in New Zealand, in Christchurch. And then the Easter church bombings in Sri Lanka, which killed 300 or so, hundreds of people. So the world is experiencing these kinds of ethno-religious acts of violence, and we see it on the news. Maybe we experience it, and the data are showing that these kind of problems that we face are rising, not decreasing. There's another side, is if we look at the countries where there have been improvements in religious freedom, as I described it, as having respect for each other and the government's protecting people's rights. Countries where there have been high increases in restrictions on religious freedom have had the lowest GDP growth, whereas countries where the restrictions on religious freedom have decreased have had the highest GDP growth since the economic downturn. So that's just a recent example of other research I've done showing the correlation, and I would even argue causation, of protecting religious freedom as part of what creates a good business environment for a country. Also, we find that innovation, this is these are data from the World Economic Forum, innovation is twice as strong in countries where you have high religious freedom or low restrictions on religious freedom, or low restrictions on religion. Now, this is an interesting chart. This comes from Bloomberg just a couple months ago. And they gave this chart, and they were just talking about where millionaires are coming to and moving from. So I'm sure I don't know how many millionaires there are in this room. Probably, at least, I'm not one, so I would guess there's not too many in this room, but maybe there's some. But millionaires are leaving countries like China. 15,000 millionaires are leaving China per year. Russia, India, Turkey, France are countries where they're leaving, and they're coming to countries like Australia, is where most millionaires are going to. So when I saw this chart, I thought, well, this chart, what would that look like if I put on the level of restrictions on religion or restrictions on religious freedom on top of there? So where millionaires are leaving from has the highest levels of restrictions on religious freedom. And where they're going to are countries where there's relatively low restrictions on religious freedom. Again, that's you could say that's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. These factors are all part of what makes people feel like I want to stay in this country and invest my money. So millionaires are just another way to look at not people with money, but how did they become millionaires? Well, they were probably entrepreneurs who came up with a good idea, a good product, a good service, and then now they're going to leave that country and take it somewhere else. So religious freedom is something that's in the interests of countries economically. I looked at level of gender equality and the growth of gender equality. So gender equality has been growing around the world. So gender equality is much better today than it was a decade ago, at least according to global measures. So among the 16 countries where religious freedom increased, gender equality increased the most. Among the 19 countries where religious freedom decreased, gender equality increased the least. So we're seeing these things move in tandem. So religious freedom isn't something that's isolated from other concerns that we have, such as women's rights. Another concern is stability. So that is directly related to what this conference is about. So I looked at where stability has been increasing and where stability has been decreasing. So at the top, among the 29 countries where religious freedom has been increasing in this data set, they've had the greatest gains in stability. However, among the 84 countries where religious freedom significantly decreased over the past decade, they have seen the opposite effect. They've seen stability decrease. So again, another very stark finding on the connection between religious freedom, respecting each other's faith and belief, and governments protecting that, and the outcomes that matter to countries and to people and our neighbors. So there's, again, common ground that we find. This is just from the United States. In the United States, we find that religion contributes $1.2 trillion to the U.S. economy every year. And that comes because there's a lot of freedom for people to practice their faith in the United States. So if you're a Muslim in the U.S. and you want to start a business, you have a pretty good shot at that. If you're a Christian and you want to start a business in Saudi Arabia, there's not a whole lot of great opportunity. So where you have more religious freedom, you give everyone, regardless of their faith, an ability to contribute to the economy. So we see that coming out in the numbers. However, in the United States, on the social side, we see that 36% of workers in the United States have felt that they've been discriminated against in the workplace because of their faith. Maybe it's not letting them have the day off that they want to worship, or not providing for their dietary needs, or not sort of respecting their desire to dress in a religious way in the workplace. Well, when we look at that, there's been a lot of news about LGBT rights, and businesses have taken a lot of care to make sure that they don't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. But actually, religion, people experience discrimination more often based on religion than on LGBT rights. And businesses haven't paid as much attention to religion, but they've paid a lot of attention to LGBT rights. So part of what I'm saying is that religion is the next big thing that businesses are going to start paying attention to because of data like this. And once businesses start paying attention to something, the world starts paying attention to something. So there's some hope if businesses start paying attention to religious discrimination. Now, oftentimes, people pit one thing against another, like either you're for LGBT rights or you're for religious freedom, or that's how the narrative goes in the United States. But the data tell a completely different story. So among countries high in religious freedom, there's the highest level of support for LGBT rights. Among countries that are the bottom countries on religious freedom, there's less support for LGBT rights. So even these things, which to some people seem opposites, actually in the data work together hand in hand. And then also, if we look at, if we flip it around, countries with higher support for LGBT rights also have higher religious freedom. So it works both ways. And I have a whole report on this. So where you see LGBT rights growing, you see religious freedom growing, and vice versa. So even on this topic that's quite controversial to many people, it's not in opposition to religious freedom. Well, I want to, now the last part of my comments before we open for questions is talk about how business can make a significant difference. So I don't know if you've heard of this company called Salesforce. They are a company that's grown tremendously over the past 2 decades. The tallest building in San Francisco is the Salesforce Tower. It's the tallest building in the United States west of the Mississippi. They have offices on all 5 continents. They provide the software that helps other companies manage their clients and their data and their human resources. And they provide that free even for nonprofit organizations. So you don't have to pay them for that. But if you're a bigger business and you have special needs, then that's where they make their money. Well, they have within their company, and all the big companies, major global corporations, have what's called employee resource groups, ERGs. And at Salesforce, they added a new one just recently called Faith Force. They have their LGBT group, Outforce, their women's network, their network for veterans, Vet Force. But Faith Force was only added 2 years ago, and it's the fastest growing employee group within this company. It's grown faster than any of the other groups that they've ever started. And it got started when one day the head of their diversity or their equity program was approached by an employee who said, Tony, I'm afraid I'm going to get fired because I'm doing something that I think the company won't approve of. I've been having a prayer meeting during break time with some other colleagues. And Tony fell off his chair and said, are we living in the dark ages where there's an inquisition against people and they can't practice their faith in the workplace? He said, of course you can do that. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? But that was the perception people had, that in their workplace they had to keep their faith outside the door and couldn't bring it in. So the business world is now starting to see that their companies are filled. Remember my first slide, religion is growing. Their companies are filled with people of faith, of all faiths, many different faiths. But if you make them squelch that, it removes, for many people, not all people, but for many people, what their core motivation is and why they get up in the, why they even work in the first place, because they're trying to be a good servant of their God or within their faith. So this Faith Force has been growing. One example of the business case for it is that this company's in Silicon Valley. They had a man from another company, a top engineer from one of the other Silicon Valley tech firms, call them up and say, I hear that you can pray in your company. They won't let me do that here. And they said, well, come on over. And then the other company lost a top engineer. Now, that's a big loss because the top engineer at a tech firm has all the institutional knowledge. They've probably created things. Now they take that to the next place. So for businesses, understanding religion is a bottom line issue. It's not just a feel-good issue. I'll just give a couple other examples. Texas Instruments has been faith-friendly for many decades. I just circled some of their faith-oriented groups, a Jewish group, a Christian group, an Indian group, which mostly has Hindus and Buddhists as part of it, a Muslim employee group in the company. Tyson Food, that produces most of the chickens we eat and a lot of the meat we eat in the United States if you eat meat. They have chaplains in all of their factories that the company pays for. And they say it's not because we're a religious company, but faith is important to us, and we want to make sure that that side of our employees is taken care of. And it's not whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or even an atheist, you have needs. You might have a relative who dies. You might have family issues that a chaplain can help with. So that's a different, I said I was going to flip the coin and tell you a different side of business. So I want to end with some Middle East opportunities and introduce you to some people who have been working to lower ethno-religious tensions from a business side. This is Fuad Makhzoumi from Lebanon. He's sort of like the Donald Trump of Lebanon. So you might like that or not like that, but he has his own private jet, his castle, mansion on the Mediterranean. And he's had me to his home, and he invited all representatives of all the religious groups in Lebanon and the media and government people to sit in his palatial living room and have a conversation with me about what business can do to lower religious tensions. And he's done that himself with his millions and billions. He set up the Makhzoumi Foundation, and he's a Sunni Muslim, but he said, okay, our foundation's going to help people get trained for jobs, but not just my people, not just the Sunnis, but the Shia, the Maronites, the Druze, the Orthodox, the Assyrians, all of them are welcome to benefit from our services. Because he said, look, if we don't work together, we're going to start killing each other again. That's a direct quote. And so, he sees the business sense in bringing people together. Just last month, here in New York at the Harvard Club, we had the first International Religious Freedom business roundtable. The United States, if you may or may not know, but since year 2000, we've had an International Religious Freedom Ambassador. So under each administration, Republican and Democrat, and I've worked with all of them through the years. And so Ambassador Sam Brownback was part of hosting a roundtable with business leaders to talk about how businesses can fight against this religious intolerance that's growing around the world, in our country and all around. And we had representatives from 30 major companies coming. And so this has now set off a chain of events that's going to continue. These are representatives from the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence, the King Hamad Center for Peaceful Coexistence in Bahrain. And they have agreed now to host a business roundtable on international religious freedom and belief in Manama. So we'll be having that in the capital, Bahrain, with top business leaders from the Middle East to engage on this topic. One of the, I hope you can read the small print. Of course you can't, but you can read the bigger part, Corporate Pledge on Religious Diversity and Inclusion. One of the things that my foundation, the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, has done is to develop some basic tools that provide guidance for companies on these issues. So this corporate pledge on religious diversity and inclusion has 4 main points, and those you should be able to read. The first is that you don't discriminate or harass people on the basis of their religion or belief, including if they have no religious belief or some other non-religious belief that guides their life. Second is that you accommodate their sincerely held beliefs in the workplace, as long as it doesn't, go counter to what your business is all about. But do your best to make sure that they feel comfortable and they can practice their faith in the workplace. Third, that they recognize that religious freedom promotes sustainable and innovative business in society. And the third, that they commit themselves to protecting that. So part of being part of the roundtable is to getting businesses to sign on to that. And then, signing something is one thing, but doing it's another. So we've developed with the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding here in New York, a corporate religious diversity assessment tool that companies can then do a self-assessment to see how well they're doing on those points. So it's a self-assessment. So we've been successful in getting a number of Fortune 500 companies to start looking at themselves in the mirror, you could say, and how they're doing on this topic, both within their company and then how they face their communities on these issues. So I'm going to end just with an opportunity that all of you have, in addition to whatever country you're in, and if you're the king of a region, you would have an opportunity to convene one of these roundtables. They're for CEOs. Another is to nominate business leaders that you may know for our Global Business and Interfaith Peace Awards that we give out every 2 years at the start of the Paralympic Games. We give these awards out with the United Nations Global Compact. The UN Global Compact is the group that helps companies engage in supporting the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There are about 6,000 companies in the world that are members of the UN Global Compact. So we salute CEOs who are advancing religious freedom, interfaith understanding, and peace worldwide. So I have some, if you're interested, if you know someone, I have a small card that gives you the website where you can make a nomination. So I think we have some time for questions and answers.